Ever since Boruto left the village back in chapter 80 of the manga, the main questions have been, where did he go? Who's on his side? Does Boruto have secret allies? These questions haven't been answered as yet, but based on the slight hints given throughout Boruto's anime, I think this secret ally might actually be Orochimaru. You see, what a lot of people don't realize is that Orochimaru is insanely overpowered. Not only that, he's also immune to the effects of Omnipotence, or at least he should be. To understand why this is the case, we need to go back to the events of Naruto during the 4th Great Ninja War, more specifically chapter 618 or chapter 618, which is titled The All-Knowing. In this chapter, we witness the resurrection of the prior 4 Kages at the hands of Orochimaru himself using the Edo Tensei Impure World Reincarnation technique. This technique allows you to bind the soul of a deceased person to a living vessel. But in order for that technique to work, the soul must reside in the Pure Lands, or at least they can't be trapped or sealed in any sense. However, this was the case for the 4 Kages. Their souls were trapped in the belly of the Soul Reaper, which means they could not be summoned. So in order to free the trapped souls, Orochimaru needed to cut open the belly of the Reaper upon summoning him, which would require Orochimaru himself to become a sacrifice. Of course, Orochimaru was able to accomplish this and survived by using the living corpse reincarnation technique. This allows Orochimaru to transfer his soul to someone else's body, thus making it his own. Now, the important detail here isn't the jutsu itself, but whose body he used it to possess. That, of course, being the body of a white Zetsu. You see, the history of white Zetsu has been convoluted to some degree. That's why you have people who still believe that Madara created the white Zetsu using Hashirama's cells, which isn't true. But there's a reason why they believe that. You see, Zetsu himself was actually introduced in chapter 234 of Naruto's manga, which showed him observing the battle versus Naruto and Sasuke in the Valley of the End. We later saw this character pop up a few times throughout the manga with no explanation as to what or who he was until chapter 512. In this chapter, Kabuto requested a piece of White Zetsu's body in the event that he isn't able to capture Yamato. This is because Yamato is one of Orochimaru's test subjects that were injected with Hashirama's cells. His experiment was a success, which provided him with the ability to use wood release and possess Hashirama's genetic composition to some degree. Now, the reason why White Zetsu would be a go-to substitution for Yamato is because their bodies also consist of Hashirama's cells to some degree. You see, later on in this very same chapter, Obito, who is still pretending to be Madara at this point in time, brought Kabuto to his underground facility where he revealed the husk of the Ten Tails known as the Gedo statue, which was sitting upon what appears to be a mini divine tree. Now, I'm sure you guys have many questions about how is this possible when the Ten Tails is the god tree, but I will address that in a few minutes. What's important here is what was revealed to us later on in this chapter, which was a petrified form of Hashirama stuck within the stem of the tree itself. Obito referred to this thing as Hashirama Senju, then later said that it was something replicated from the living cells he stole from Hashirama in their last battle, which would be the moment he bit off a piece of Hashirama's cells, the same cells he grafted onto his wounds, which then allowed him to awaken the Renegon. He then showed Kabuto that he has over 100,000 white Zetsus and explained that it took most of the chakra of the Biju stored inside the Gedo statue to create them. Again, this is still Obito pretending to be Madara, which means that the information he's relaying to Kabuto is just what he himself heard from Madara himself. Now, I'm not saying that Madara lied to Obito, but more so that he himself didn't know the truth. You see, during the battle with Kaguya, Black Zetsu confirmed that Madara did indeed awaken the Renegon and summon the Gedo statue years after he grafted Hashirama's flesh into his wound. He also revealed that Madara then cultured Hashirama's flesh using the Gedo statue in an effort to prolong his life. So that is what resulted in the Hashirama looking figure sticking out of the divine tree. However, what's most interesting here is that Black Zetsu revealed that Madara thought he created the white Zetsus using Hashirama's cells because they seem to be an incidental byproduct of him feeding the cells to the statue. But the truth is that they were actually the people put under infinite Tsukunomi from the past. Black Zetsu himself was actually the one who extracted them, the white Zetsu, from the statue and made it seem like Madara created them. So what this reveals is that the white Zetsu are not beings created using Hashirama's cells. They only possess those cells because it was fed to the Gedo statue, who then cultured it and then dispersed it into already existing white Zetsus. By the way, culture just means to be grown or propagated in an artificial medium, that medium being the Gedo statue in this instance. So them possessing these cells would be similar to how Kabuto injected Hashirama Hashirama's cells into Sasuke's body in order to heal him. That doesn't then mean that his entire genetic structure was remodeled with Hashirama's cells, but it does mean that they exist within Sasuke's body. The reason why I bring this up is because the White Zetsus are in fact remodeled humans. That was directly stated by Black Zetsu when he informed Team 7 of the true origins of White Zetsu, and confirmed to them that humans were transformed slowly over time in order for them to become soldiers. Now we already knew that, but I wanted to place an emphasis on the word transformed, which in this case means they were genetically altered, to the point where it started to show in their physical appearances and the abilities they were later able to use. What I'm trying to say is that humans were remodeled by the divine tree using Otsutsuki DNA. The reason why this makes perfect sense is because the Tentacles can only turn into a divine tree and bear a chakra fruit after consuming an Otsutsuki. So even though we never saw an Otsutsuki get fed to the divine tree Kaguya took her fruit from, that doesn't then mean that it didn't happen. In fact, per the lore and what's stated in canon, that had to have happened. So that simply means that the fruit Kaguya consumed consisted of Otsutsuki DNA, and so does the tree she took the fruit from. This lines up perfectly since Code's entire reason for feeding Boruto to the Tentacles hinges solely on the fact that Boruto's Otsutsuki DNA will then be included in the fruit he reaps from the tree, which will then Otsutsukify his own body. So carrying over this logic to the White Zetsu, who were created by the divine tree remodeling humans, the same divine tree that already consumed an Otsutsuki, should mean that the White Zetsus are beings remodeled using Otsutsuki DNA. And as I said before, this manifested in their physical appearances as well, with them now possessing white skin and horns protruding from their bodies. These are all characteristics of the Otsutsuki. Now you could say they only look that way due to Hashirama's cells, and I thought of that as well, since we have the example of Danzo's Hashirama cell arm having this grey whitish color. However, the reason why that arm looks that way isn't because of Hashirama's cells. It's more so due to the skin color of its original owner, which would be Shin Uchiha. Now Shin Uchiha was experimented on using Hashirama's cells, which is why his arm consists of those cells, but him having that color was never stated to be because of those cells. In fact, you have characters such as Orochimaru himself who had white skin since he was a child, and so was the case for Sai. In addition to that, you have cases where other people don't develop white skin after being directly injected with Hashirama's cells, those being Orochimaru's other experiments such as Yamato and even Sasuke, who received those cells during the war. So there really isn't any evidence suggesting that having Hashirama's cells gives you white skin. Now I really didn't need to say all that because in the 4th databook itself, it says White Zetsu seem to be born from a crossbreed between Mazo and Hashirama's cells, Mazo referring to the Gedo statue or Gedo Mazo. And just to be clear, it says seems to be born, which means this is not stating fact. It then went on to say, however, actually, they are imprisoned by Kaguya in ancient times in Infinite Tsukunomi. The people became inhabitants of a dream world as mere shadows of their former selves. It then says, people that are captured by the God Tree spending time in it slowly becomes White Zetsu. So not only does it confirm that they get transformed by the God Tree, it also specifies that they became White Zetsu even absent of Hashirama cells. So the most likely case is that they got remodeled by the Otsutsuki DNA that was introduced to the Tentacles. Now this simply means that Orochimaru's body, which is the body of a White Zetsu, is either fully or partially Otsutsuki. And as we know, Otsutsukis are immune to Omnipotence, which would make Orochimaru immune to Omnipotence. So the logic does make sense, but there is one issue. Do you need to be fully Otsutsuki to not be affected, or is it that you need to be a certain percent Otsutsuki for it to matter? The reason why this question needs to be asked is because Kawaki was confirmed to just be 80% Otsutsuki before he lost karma, which is what Otsutsukifies the body. He did later regain the karma in the form of a weapon, which allowed him to utilize the Otsutsuki DNA that was already extracted within his body per Amada's statements. But nothing said he somehow got the remaining 20% of Ishiki's data. Well, nothing aside from Code saying that Kawaki and Boruto are now full Otsutsukis, which I wouldn't count as reliable since he has no way of truly knowing what percentage Otsutsuki Kawaki is. It seems like Code came to that conclusion due to Kawaki manifesting Ishiki's dojutsu and using his abilities, which might be true, but was never confirmed, and how he got the remaining 20% is never explained or even referenced. So it seems like Code is just making an assumption absent of fact. Now if you go off actual statements by Shiki himself and Momoshiki, Kawaki should be around 80 to 82% Otsutsuki. So this likely means that you don't have to be 100% Otsutsuki in order for you not to be affected by Omnipotence. You just need to be Otsutsuki enough. I say that because you have a character like Mitsuki who is likely partially Otsutsuki since he was created using some of Orochimaru's cells, among other things of course. But Mitsuki was affected by Omnipotence and Ada's charm ability, so that likely indicates that Mitsuki doesn't possess enough Otsutsuki genetics for it to matter. Similar to how the Senju and Uchiha are all descendants of Otsutsukis, but Sasuke was still affected since his Otsutsuki gene is like 5% or less at this point. So it is possible that Orochimaru himself isn't Otsutsuki enough if a full white Zetsu body isn't Otsutsuki enough to withstand Omnipotence. But it is equally as possible that he is. So Orochimaru being Boruto's only ally at this point in time does make sense. And the reason why I keep saying his only ally is because Sasuke likely isn't an ally of Boruto anymore. I say that because in the recent chapters, Sarada and Sumire confirm that Omnipotence fixes contradictions over time and reinforces the ability if someone notices that something doesn't make sense. And as we saw pre-time skip, Sasuke was already having issues fighting against Omnipotence, even with Sarada convincing him by awakening her Mangekyo Sharingan, along with all the contradictions he later noticed. Now, absent of any headcanon about Sarada using Genjutsu on Sasuke, and not Sasuke just believing his daughter due to him understanding the raw emotions needed in order to awaken the Mangekyo, it's possible that Sasuke succumbed to the effects of Omnipotence over time since it has been 3 years. In that case, I see Sasuke asking Boruto to imprison him so he wouldn't act against him, and I also see Orochimaru aiding Boruto in that act. So in essence, Sasuke isn't present in the manga because he's locked in a test tube in one of Orochimaru's labs somewhere. That leaves Orochimaru, the prior master of Sasuke, now being the master of Sasuke's student in some sense. With that being said, I did notice other things during my extensive research, such as this imagery being very similar to what happened in chapter 2 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, when one of Code's claw grimes seemingly consumed one of the humans and turned into a tree. So what this means is that this mini god tree the Gedo statue is sitting on was likely created using Hashirama's cultured cells. But it's also likely that it created the tree, then infused it with Hashirama's cells, which is how it infused the Zetsus with Hashirama's DNA. Another thing to point out is that this area which shows the Gedo statue sitting on the mini divine tree is actually the same area Team 7 visited in Boruto episode 52, which is when they encountered an evolved white Zetsu. You can see that the bud the Gedo statue was sitting on is now closed, it has the same markings on the walls around it, and the same structure to stand on directly in front of the tree. In addition to that, the markings on the wall which leads to the root of the tree is the same, along with what's below the tree as well. So it's very clear that this is indeed the same location Madara stored the army of white Zetsus. What's also interesting is that in this episode, Mitsuki knew everything about the white Zetsus and attributed that knowledge to Orochimaru. This was more so expounded upon during the entire fiasco with Victor and his fake divine tree. Not only that, we also had Orochimaru erasing people from existence without weaving hand signs, which is very similar to an ability we saw Kaguya display in the past. And as we know, Shinjutsu are divine abilities stemming directly from the Otsutsuki, which doesn't require them to weave hand signs. Suffice to say that the ability Orochimaru used to perform this feat is likely Shinjutsu, which he is likely able to perform due to him being partially Otsutsuki. Now, there are multiple abilities in Naruto that doesn't require you to weave hand signs, but given the similarities to Kaguya's abilities and everything I mentioned above, I'd wager that this one is in fact Shinjutsu. Now, there is one thing people will use to discount Orochimaru being Otsutsuki or partially Otsutsuki, which is him being placed under Infinite Tsukunomi during the war. Now, the reason why people believe this is that they have this notion that Otsutsukis can't be placed under Genjutsu, and they only believe this because they've never seen an Otsutsuki be placed under Genjutsu. So it's really an argument from ignorance because they've never seen it, so it can't happen. Now, that doesn't make sense really. We haven't seen it, so we can't come to that conclusion. However, there is this example of Boruto being placed under Genjutsu by Sarada in the Boruto anime, and this was after Boruto was partially Otsutsukified by Momoshiki's Karma Seal. So Boruto was partially Otsutsuki at this point in time, yet he was still susceptible to genjutsu. Now if you go under the notion that Orochimaru isn't full Otsutsuki and he's also partially Otsutsuki, you can still argue that him being placed under Infinite Tsukunomi doesn't mean that he isn't partially Otsutsuki. So we don't even need him to be full Otsutsuki, since we already mentioned before that him being partially Otsutsuki could also work as well. And that's just me going under the assumption that Otsutsukis can't be affected by genjutsu, which isn't a provable fact. With that being said though, let me know your thoughts on the video down below. Do you think it's possible that Orochimaru is partially Otsutsuki? Do you think he's helping Boruto? Do you think he's immune to omnipotence, or at least somewhat resistant? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Drop a like if you like the video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.